Good day. Welcome to a special edition of The Pipeline. Today is May 14th, 2021. I am Derek Fildebrandt, Western Standard publisher. I'm joined today by Western Standard news editor and our Alberta bureau chief, Dave Naylor. How you doing, Dave?
I'm good, Derek. Thanks.
And making her debut appearance on The Pipeline is Western Standard field correspondent Nadine Wellwood. How you doing, Nadine?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining me, and thank all of you watching or listening for joining me right now. We want to thank all of our members right now for their support. If you're not yet a member, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try out a 15-day free trial and see if the Western Standard is something that you think is worth your money. Bailout-free media. Also, I should point out, maybe you want to wait a few hours. We're having some technical difficulties with the membership registration. Our team is working right now frantically to try and get that fixed. Let's jump straight into it, though. The Night of the Long Knives, the Great Purge, the Gong Show, the Cluster What, or FUBAR. I don't know how to describe yesterday in one cheesy punchline. I think it's going to take a lot of cheesy punchlines to sum up what the hell happened. We're going to get into kind of a blow-by-blow of what happened. The Western Standard had a particular front-row seat in the shenanigans of yesterday in Alberta politics, but it all began with a letter from UCP MLA and caucus chair Todd Loewen publishing a letter raking Kenney over the coals for what he says is his failed leadership, wrong direction on policy, and calling on Kenney to resign, and also including in the letter his resignation as chair of the UCP caucus. Well, that did not take long. A UCP caucus meeting was canceled. An emergency meeting was called for soon afterwards, where both Todd Loewen and Drew Barnes, who had nothing to do with this whole thing, is just a general pain in the ass of Kenney, but he had nothing to do with this. He seemed to be collateral damage in it, but I suppose it's been a long time coming. Both of them punted from the United Conservative Party caucus. So the United Conservative Party, not so united this morning. Dave, why don't you, I've kind of given the very, very high level. We're going to kind of go in this kind of blow by blow. Just give us the high level of what happened overall first.
Well, Derek, I think your opening description kind of described it, because I don't think there are any words. It was a day and an early evening of high political intrigue and drama, the likes of which may not have been seen in Alberta before. The day got off to a very early start, just after midnight, when MLA Todd Loewen put a Facebook post up calling for Kenney to go. A very scathing letter saying he's lost the faith of his caucus and of Albertans. So that's what Kenney woke up to Thursday morning. As you mentioned, Derek, a caucus meeting was called and then abruptly canceled. About 8 o'clock or so, MLA David Hanson tweeted or put on Facebook his support for Todd Loewen. The meeting was put back on again for the afternoon session, a mandatory meeting. And during that session, a secret ballot was had. Results still not made public, but we're working on it. And the secret ballot removed both Loewen and Drew Barnes from the caucus. They're now sitting as independents, I guess. And I just got off the phone with Drew Barnes a couple of minutes ago. I've got some interesting stuff to talk to you about what he said. But those were sort of the highlights, a full afternoon of drama. And if you were a Western Standard Twitter follower, you certainly got your money's worth there. You were along for the entire ride. At one point, we had a story about the leaks that they were discussing about having leaks upon their leaks. So
don't spoil us. That's a whole that's a segment we're going to get into. Don't spoil it.
Exactly. So. As you mentioned, we'll break down each one of those events, but high drama for the UCP.
Indeed. Okay. Well, we'll begin with the beginning of the day. I woke up to incredible news that Todd Loewen had published this, again, I'm going to use far too many adjectives, scathing, bloodletting, very hard-hitting letter to Jason Kenney and his fellow UCP MLAs, but published openly and publicly, resigning as chairman of the UCP caucus, but not from the caucus itself. This was published at midnight, possibly about 12:01 or 12:02 roughly. Very strange timing. You know, I understand something about the media cycle here, and if you want something to get attention, you normally publish it around 10 a.m. or maybe very first thing in the morning before the newsrooms are even full. You want to, you know, you auto set something to send early in the morning on a weekday. You don't send something at midnight. That's when you want to bury news. So clearly something must have been going on in the background to send it at this time. I don't think we actually know what was going on, but I would call this known unknowns. We know something was happening for Todd Loewen to publish this letter really in the middle of the night. We woke up to this incredible news. Before we go to you, Nadine, Dave, why don't you just tell us a bit about the letter first?
Yeah, it was not a short one by any stretch of the imagination. Derek, as mentioned, this went on shortly after 11 o'clock, or sorry, after midnight. It was basically a damning statement on Kenney's leadership. He says the Kenney response to a hostile federal government has been weak and ineffective. He said Albertans have lost trust in the government. And the quote, one of the quotes was, they're not willing to extend any benefits of the doubt to us on most issues. He said Kenney was out of touch and arrogant. They expected their MLAs to represent them, and not to be told, not for the MLAs to tell the constituents what's going on, but the other way around. He said the caucus never gets a fair hearing with Kenney, and basically his supporters say they cannot tolerate Kenney's style of top-down leadership anymore. So really a lengthy, scathing letter that touched on all points of perceived problems with Kenney's leadership, Derek.
Nadine, what did you make of this letter? You've had a chance to read it. It obviously, you know, I don't know when this war began. I don't know when the first shot was fired. I think Drew Barnes has been firing some shots, and Jason Kenney firing shots back, essentially in a running battle for over a year. But if today wasn't the opening shot, it was probably the first cannonball. This was a senior member of the UCP caucus on his second term. He was first elected with the Wild Rose in 2015. Downright calling for Jason Kenney to resign in some pretty damning language. What do you make of this, Nadine?
Well, I see this as, you know, Kenney has been able to keep under wraps a lot of the dissent that's been going on. And when we had those 19 MLAs that came out and spoke out against the end the lockdowns, I think that really showed a threat to his ability to lead this party. And yesterday, I think we're just seeing things kind of come to a front. People have had enough. And what we need to note here is, I think the division that's happening, we're seeing it rural versus urban. We're seeing it in, you know, left and right. We're seeing these are elected officials. These elected officials feel and believe, correctly so, that they represent their constituents. And for me, what I'm seeing is a growing concern of these political party leaders who seem to think that it's not about the constituents, it's about them and the party. And so for me, I look at what's kind of going on behind the scenes here, and I'm thinking, you know, there's a lot more MLAs that would like to represent the voices and be the voices for the constituents, not for just the party leader. And Kenney campaigned on that. He campaigned on that hard. This was a grassroots movement. It was about the people of Alberta, and he has done everything exactly the opposite.
Well, that's, I suppose, how many would like the system to work, but I fear it hasn't for quite some time. But Jason Kenney made a particular point when he was running to unite the Wild Rose and Progressive Conservative parties that this would be the case. He made the case when he was running for the UCP leadership, especially knowing how particularly important this was for Wild Rose members. But, I think that we saw the Grassroots guarantee went out the window almost right away. We saw stacked nominations. He wanted his people in. This has been a long time coming. He's been able to paper over it without any great political price to be paid until now, though. But I don't think this should come as a shock to any of us that this has really finally come to this point. Okay, so the letter is released in the morning. Dave Hansen, another guy first elected with the Wild Rose in 2015. He's from Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, I believe. He endorses the letter and says, "Good on you, Todd." He didn't write in his own words, Kenney should go, but he endorsed the letter that very clearly says Kenney should go. The scheduled caucus meeting is canceled. All hell breaks loose in the Premier's office. But then soon after, little birds start talking to the Western Standard, and we get word that a new caucus meeting has been scheduled for 12:30 that day. And they told us that they expect on the agenda would be the expulsion of 4 MLAs. I won't name the other 2. In the end, it turned out to be Barnes and Lowen. Actually, I will name one. Obviously, Dave Hansen. I don't know how you kick out Todd for calling for the resignation of the leader. You kick out Drew Barnes for not calling for the resignation of the leader, and then you leave it another guy who did call for the resignation of the leader. Very strange. And one more MLA who we're not going to mention. So we all of a sudden we had a pipeline straight into this caucus meeting. The first item, there was no formal agenda presented because they were afraid of it getting leaked to us, but we figured out what's going on in the meeting soon enough. We had several MLAs in that caucus who were telling us what was happening in real time. The first thing they were discussing were leaks to the Western Standard. Dave, this story is very important and insightful, but it's also kind of funny. Why don't you tell us about the leaks and the leaks of the leaks and the leaks of the leaks of the leaks?
It's one hell of a leaky story there, Derek. Western Standard has got several good sources within the UCP caucus. That's what journalists do. We cultivate sources who will tell us things. If I'm Jason Kenney, this is a huge problem because he cannot keep anything secret. If you look at last week, for example, he told the caucus all about the Rogue Rodeo in Bowdoin and how terrible it was. And he ended up telling the caucus that if they're our base, I want a new base. And of course, that shocked our sources. We heard from at least 3 of them that day who was telling us what he said and how horrified they were. So, of course, that story gets out, and then the other stories get out. So it's got to be very, very frustrating for Jason Kenney to realize that these leaks are happening. As you said, we were live tweeting the agenda yesterday, basically as it was happening. We tweeted the fact that they were discussing our leaks. We'd leaked a story saying they were discussing our leaks. So it was it was almost comedy in a way, but it's a deadly serious problem for any sort of government, for any sort of organization, when you've got people that are basically not happy with what's going on and they want the story to get out.
So it was, it was almost downright comical what was happening. I can tell you, from my time in politics, caucus confidentiality is extremely important. You need to be able to speak your mind around a caucus table and that be held in confidence. But when a caucus does become dysfunctional or extremely dysfunctional, as it certainly appears the UCP caucus has become, leaks become essentially the only way for MLAs to speak out if they feel they're not being heard or listened to around the caucus table and by the leader. And then you get situations like this. So first they were discussing leaks from the Western Standard and a bit from Rick Bell. and that gets passed along to the Western Standard. And so while they were discussing what was described to us as a witch hunt for the leaks and demanding to know who it was, I guess all of a sudden the Premier's phone starts buzzing, or someone whispered in his ear off camera, Mr. Premier, the Western Standard has reported that we're currently discussing links right now. And the leaks were good, but I really wish I could have, they weren't in a room, I guess, but I really wish I could have seen the look on some people's faces when that happened. And then it just kept on coming. Nadine, I'd like your take. I've never seen anything like this, where we've had not just a caucus meeting, but a particularly hypersensitive caucus meeting dealing with politics of the highest order in Alberta, in a government caucus, coming out like this. The fact that the UCP caucus is this leaky right now, what do you think it says about the state of that caucus and party and the leadership of Jason Kenney?
You know what happened with leaky ship? They sink. That's my opinion. Jason Kenney has lost control of his caucus. There's no doubt about that. And that's, I think, to me, just an example. And what we saw yesterday of poor leadership. Leadership is not a dictatorship. It's, you convince people, not force people. And they do feel like they're not being heard. Again, they are elected officials. And even as a backbencher, you have a voice, you have a responsibility to your constituents. And, we have different regions throughout Alberta that will have different opinions because they're affected in different ways. And they are not feeling like they are being heard right now. And this is very dangerous for Jason Kenney, because it's his responsibility, like every good leader, to make sure that everybody understands what the agenda is, why they're doing what they're doing, and to have everybody move forward as a united front. And that is the one thing that I think it's called the disunited party right now, not the United Conservative Party.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. I will say this. I think that Premier Kenney and those around him will probably be quite disappointed when they learn that throwing those two MLAs out of the caucus does not stop the leaks. There were quite a few MLAs in regular contact with the Western Standard, including one member in the cabinet. So I think there's going to be some cold sweat sleeps in the weeks ahead here. Let's move the story along. We got into this strange point where we were there were so many leaks coming that we couldn't even stay on top of creating new stories. We had to create a live updates page. Essentially, we were already live tweeting it. We decided to create a live updates page. We updated it in real time. You can see on the screen there, 12:25, there's an update with a leak, 12:45, update with a leak. And that went all the way down till the very end of it. And the meeting, after the meeting was reconvened and the results were read out, and Lowen and Barnes were expelled. Really a blow-by-blow. It was an incredible day around the newsroom here. Dave, have you ever seen anything like this? A live, real-time update inside of a government caucus or opposition caucus, anything like this?
No, never, Derek. It's respected Mount Royal University professor of political science, Dwayne Bratt, tweeted it was unprecedented, and obviously gave us kudos. And when we were the first to break what the results were, he said, of course, Western Standard again. So we did a hell of a job, and we certainly own the story, and we were given the proper credit for it. But in terms of having seen it before, no, I don't think there's ever been a provincial or federal caucus. And Nadine hit the nail on the head. He's lost control, and I don't think there's ever been a caucus on any level of government that has had this number of leakers. right? If it was just one person and you could identify that one person, then it would be fine. But as you know, Derek, we've got multiple sources on all levels, and it's like a game of whack-a-mole. If you're going to hit one on the head, there's going to be another one pop up, and
that is a particularly apt. That is particularly apt description. If we call these sources, people who don't like them call them moles. But if they are moles, boy, I think they're in for a serious game of whack-a-mole.
They are, and it gets to the point where it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in that somebody who has not leaked anything, they all of a sudden say, hey, I'm kind of missing the boat here, so they're going to tell us some stuff. So
I think the interesting part with all of this is going to be, how does he fix it? Because you just said it, Dave. This is when it's one, that's a different story. But when you have multiple people coming forward and people are this disenfranchised, the solution is a lot harder.
Yeah, and especially, Nadine, as we get close to an election, and if Kenney doesn't turn this around quickly, I was talking to Drew Barnes earlier this morning. He points out that Kenney is polling at the same numbers as Justin Trudeau in Alberta. So if he doesn't turn it around quickly, all these people that are in the caucus are going to be faced with losing their jobs and being out on the unemployment line. So if you thought you had leaks now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, let's discuss, in a moment here. So Jason Kenney says that this was a small and isolated group. There will be no more of this, won't be tolerated again. It's over, it's failed, they're gone. Well, I'm not paid to give Jason Kenney advice, but if he happens for some reason to be watching right now, let me give Premier Kenney a piece of advice. I don't believe this is over. The troublemakers are not gone. In a best case scenario, let's go through some of the scenarios going forward. In a best case scenario, for Jason Kenney's perspective at least, is that because I think he knows there's more than just these two troublemakers. His goal here was to make an example of them, to cull them from the herd, hang them out to dry, and display their corpse for the rest of the caucus to see. And the hope of that is that it'll scare the rest into line. They'll say, "Oh crap! Well, I don't want to be on the outside. No one likes that. Can't get reelected like that. So I'm going to shut up and just kind of go with the flow now." That's his best case scenario. That I would not bet on that succeeding. The other path forward he has is honey, and that is to he's already tried to make an example of the two, but now he could instead of just offering the stick and fear, he can try to address what these problems are, and understand that at least a very large proportion of the UCP caucus is unhappy with the direction of the government, both on fair deal issues vis-a-vis Ottawa, with fiscal policy running record amounts of debt. Jason Kenney is running far larger deficits than Rachel Notley ever did. And of course, lockdowns and current restrictions that are in place. It doesn't appear he's doing that because one of our leaks during yesterday's meeting, Kenney said, "I don't know why you guys," quote, "I don't know why you're also upset." He said he does not believe the government is doing anything seriously wrong, that they've stricken the correct balance here. It doesn't sound like he's changing course. And of course, his third option, as I see it, is to ignore this all, to hope that just time heals all and it goes away. But history doesn't tend to show that. When you've got a festering wound in caucus, when you've got growing discontent, unless you address it and address it well, it tends to fester and get worse rather than go away. Nadine, what do you think is the best path forward for Kenney here? That forget what is best from Alberta for this sake of this argument. What is the best for Jason Kenney and his ability to salvage his leadership and premiership?
I'm going to be honest. I don't know if he can. And somebody has worked in aerospace and defense and has a little bit of a background in strategy and leadership. even Colonel Redmond, when he talked about how this pandemic was being dealt with by the UCP government, he made it very clear that you do not lead from a place of fear. You have to lead from a place of confidence. And that is, I think, for me, where Jason Kenney has failed. And I don't believe that he has the trust of his caucus right now to be able to recover from this. So his really, in my opinion, only strategy is to continue with the stick and to lead from a place of fear. And that is not going to be effective. When Jason Kenney came to Alberta from Ottawa, they do things a little bit differently in Ottawa. And Conservatives have a very different mindset than that of Liberals and NDP. And, all the things that he truly ran on, those were his pillars of strength. That's where he got his show of support. People came out, in droves to vote for smaller budgets, smaller government, more transparency, grassroots, all of these things that are so valued by the Conservative voter. And the distrust he has created, regrettably, I don't think he can recover. And I think the UCP needs to address this very quickly if they want to be a contender in 2023.
I think, sorry, Derek, I think we also need to remember that Kenney's not only fighting the war on the caucus front, he's fighting it on the grassroots front. There's been more than a dozen constituency now that have gotten together and have got signatures and have said, we want a leadership review. So I think they need to get a lot more than that to actually force it. But he's also battling the grassroots, the way the party started, the people that voted to merge the two parties. So not only is members of the caucus not happy with him, but the actual people on the ground are very upset.
Well, Dave, let's come back to what Nadine was just saying. Well, actually, first, Nadine, I'll get you maybe to elaborate on Dave's point. Kenney is fighting this on a war on several fronts. The caucus front has exploded into a new major area. I mean, he's been kind of battling with Drew Barnes and to a lesser extent some other dissident MLAs in the caucus, but it hasn't been a real threat to his leadership until now. But he has been fighting with a growing movement among the party's grassroots to call essentially a recall leadership vote. He has been so far successful one way or another at putting that off. He's facing, of course, the NDP to his left flank, and increasingly he's facing an insurgency in the Wild Rose Independence Party on his right flank. Why don't you, Nadine, how do you think, in addition to the caucus front here, do you think the threat from the rank and file membership itself poses any existential threat to Kenney's leadership right now?
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. These MLAs, I mean, think about it. This is their jobs. I mean, these are fantastic jobs, well paid, pretty much guaranteed. Unless you do something extravagant like what we saw yesterday, you're not going to get thrown out. And if you consider the fact that you've got this much, going on inside of caucus, this has got the pressure is coming from the bottom up. And it's actually kind of a beautiful thing to see, the fact that we do have grassroots movements and MLAs that are listening to their constituents. I think this is a monumental time for Alberta, because I think politics here is going to change significantly and monumentally after this. Jason Kenney can ignore his caucus for so long, but when these individuals are feeling this strong that they have to speak up, and they're getting that much pressure from the grassroots, the bottom up, I mean, their jobs were at risk in not speaking up, because it's the constituents in the end. It's the you and I and Dave's that vote in an election.
I'm not sure that's necessarily true, Nadine. I mean, we all like to talk. Like most people, if you ask them, do you want your MLA to represent the constituents of the party? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say the constituency. But when it comes down to it, Alberta hasn't elected an independent MLA since the early 1980s. Alberta hasn't elected an independent MP since roughly the late 90s or early 2000s. We don't elect independents. I mean, there are strong popular MLAs within parties who lose, like when the PCs got wiped out in 2015, some popular MLAs got reelected, some unpopular MLAs got reelected. The reality is most people, while they say they want strong local representation, they actually don't vote for it. It's not like the United States where we have primary systems and the party can't stop you from running if you win the primary. Here, the leader is God. He determines if you're a candidate or not, and it's damn near impossible in Canada and Alberta in particular to get elected independently. It shouldn't be so, but I'm afraid that it is. So, I think let's pivot the discussion now to what is next for Todd Loewen and Drew Barnes. Do they sit as independent UCP MLAs essentially and hope that there is a coup in the leadership, that Kenney is toppled and that they get to return under a new leader? Do they simply serve out their terms and say their piece and ride into the sunset in 2 years? Do they join another party and run under its banner, or do they run as independents? There are several paths for them on the table right now. Let's go first to you, Dave, before we get your take, Nadine.
Well, I mean, certainly the Wild Rose Independence Party would love to have either of them. The leadership candidate, Paul Hinman, put out a statement saying, praising Loewen for his courage and saying that anybody else who doesn't follow him is going to have to live with that on their conscience. And I understand you're exactly right, Derek. People don't vote for individual candidates as much as they do the party leaders. I mean, we wouldn't vote for an MP. We would vote for Stephen Harper or Justin Trudeau, whoever your or Aaron O'Toole, whoever your leader is. Now, as I mentioned, I talked to Drew Barnes this morning, and he is considering running as an independent in the 2023 election. He won the last election in 2019 by a huge plurality. He got 67% of the votes in the riding. Very, very popular MLA, who has the support of his constituents. So if he runs as an independent, he may have a good chance at doing it. Of course, if Kenney is still the leader of the UCP, he will throw everything into that Cypress Medicine Hat riding to try and defeat Drew Barnes. And you know all about that yourself, Derek. And it is rare, but especially in a rural area that Barnes is represented now for 3 terms. He's not a rookie MLA by any stretch of the imagination. So there could be an independent path in his future, I think.
Well, I mean, it is theoretically, I should say, it is legal to be elected as an MLA, independent in Alberta, but it simply doesn't happen. So the last time we had elected an independent MLA in Alberta, let me tell you who he was. He was Ray Speaker, who was essentially, he was effectively deputy prime minister and finance minister for decades under the social credit government of Ernest Manning. He was there forever. And this was at a time when people valued party brands, I think, a lot less than they do now. In fact, Alberta didn't even have televised leaders debates at the time. So people weren't really necessarily voting for the leader nearly as much as they, not anywhere close to what they do now. So it was a very different time and age in a very extraordinary circumstance. Because even before Ray Speaker, independents just don't do well in Alberta. Albertans say we want independent MLAs who do their job, but they just don't elect them. So even in the case of Ray Speaker, in roughly 1982, if I'm getting that correct, that was an extraordinarily rare circumstance. So, I mean, as popular as Drew Barnes is, if I'm a betting man, I'd say that Jesus Christ couldn't get elected as an independent MLA in Alberta.
So follow that through, though. So if that is indeed the case, and you just said that people vote for the leader, the leader of this party, Jason Kenney, it has already been made very clear, again, not only within his own caucus and MLAs, but at a grassroots level, that he is not who they want. So where does that leave the UCP?
Well, certainly, I mean, it's unquestionable. The data is clear. The evidence on the ground is clear that Jason Kenney is now an incredibly unpopular leader, increasingly within the party's rank and file, and especially among the voter base of the UCP. I know a poll that the Western Standard commissioned Main Street Research to do early in the new year found that more than half of the people who voted for the UCP under Jason Kenney in the 2019 election no longer support him. He's lost more than half of the people who have voted for him. So yes, he's an unpopular leader, but what are people going to do? I mean, I have a hard time picturing people in rural Alberta in significant enough numbers voting for the NDP, because Rachel Notley, all things considered, the NDP might not be terribly popular, but she is a popular leader. And the NDP is leading the UCP significantly in the polls. I don't see them winning in rural Alberta. In rural Alberta, the only game in town, in most circumstances, with a few anomalies here and there, is going to be between kind of the mainstream center to center-right mushy Tories and other parties on the right. Most recently, Wild Rose. Before that, federally, the Reform Party, or Social Credit again, provincially or federally. Those challenges happen there. So yes, while Kenney might be an unpopular leader, people also don't just vote for parties. They vote for leaders. They're also voting for parties. And,
Derek, I've got to disagree with you a little bit. I think what's happening in Alberta is that we are fracturing into a urban and rural electorate. And you know, you talk about the rural people voting for UCP. They're angry right now, Derek. They're really, really angry, and they do not like Jason Kenney. So if Jason Kenney is still the leader of the party in 2023, I could see a good chunk of the rural vote go to the Wild Rose, and I could see Edmonton obviously sweeping for Rachel Notley, and if some of the rural votes go to Whip and the NDP regain some of their strength in Calgary, you know, I think that's a path to victory for the NDP again. And I think that you've got, it just showed in the divide yesterday in the vote. It basically, from what we understand, broke down into a rural-urban break. The rural people were basically speaking up for Todd Loewen and Drew Barnes, and the urban people wanted them both booted. So I think that fracture in the party is going to be a huge problem going forward in the next 18 months.
Yeah. Let me just clarify for some of our listeners. I did not say that rural Alberta is going to vote for the NDP. I'm pretty clear they're not voting in significant numbers, at least, for the NDP. They didn't get many votes in rural Alberta, even when they won a significant majority government in 2015, outside of a few pockets, mostly in the northwest of the province. I don't see that happening. But outside the two big cities, the game is going to be UCP or UCP probably versus Wild Rose, depending on how that party continues to develop or not. I think that's what we're going to see. I disagree with you a little bit, Dave. I think there are increasingly three tribes in Alberta instead of two. It's not just urban, rural. Calgary and Edmonton are pretty distinctive, especially outside the downtown of Calgary. Downtown Calgary has elected federal Liberals. It's elected provincial New Democrats. Downtown Calgary can at times vote similarly to Edmonton, but outside of the downtown core of Calgary, it tends to be a moderate center-right electorate. Edmonton, at least provincially, votes dominantly for leftist parties now. But rural Alberta, and again, even rural, you have to split between the north, the central, and the south. They've got their own distinctive political cultures. But we've got three general political cultures and tribes in Alberta. And I think what we're seeing is that perhaps the United Conservative Party is simply too big a tent to hold together in the long term. The NDP has built a solid base in Edmonton, and they've got a significant beachhead in the inner parts of downtown Calgary. Their path is to build outwards from there. But, the United Conservative Party essentially took rural Alberta wild rose and slapped it together with Calgary and kind of the outer parts of Edmonton progressive conservatives. Two different tribes united mostly just by their hatred of the NDP. And that did work in opposition to keep them together with the shared goal of getting rid of the NDP. But now in government, actually having to govern and make the tough decisions, I think we're seeing that they're increasingly incompatible, that they're very difficult to work together. Nadine, do you think is this a problem, do you think, mostly with Kenney's leadership, or is it more deep than that it goes to the potential that perhaps this UCP coalition party might just be breaking under the weight of its own size?
I don't think the UCP tent necessarily was too big. I do agree there was a lot of people that came together under the banner of let's get rid of the NDP, but a strong leader, I think, could have held that together. Kenney's leadership style has been very lacking. And conservatives don't like to be told what to do. They want to be asked, informed. They'll make the decision themselves. And I think that's the key here is he ran under very strong conservative principles, and everybody rallied behind that. I think people, it doesn't matter left, right, whatever camp you happen to be in. I think anybody right now that came to the table and said, this is Alberta, and we are Albertans, and this is how we do things here, I think he could rally the troops that way. He himself, I think, has just weakened his own position by moving the tent constantly. It's kind of like COVID, this week the restriction's this, the next week the restriction's something else, and yet he fails to back it up with evidence, with proof, with confidence. And I think that's what Albertans are looking for is he made a lot of promises that he has not delivered on. And, once the trust is broken, I don't think blaming the people who voted for him is the answer. I mean, I think you have to look at the lack of leadership.
All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you all to our viewers and our listeners for joining us today, your questions, your comments, and your support, of course, as Western Standard members. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Become a member. We really appreciate what you do. The Western Standard refuses to accept government bailouts from the federal government. So we really need people to continue to step up in the numbers that you are, and become members of the Western Standard, support the work that we're doing here. Hey, if we can raise enough money, maybe we're just going to put a live television feed straight to the UCP caucus room. So
I don't think you have to. You already have one.
Well, I want HD. Right now, it's essentially Telegram and text. I want to get an HD connection, get some hi-fi in there, good lighting on our cameras, so we can really bring you what's going on. Thank you both for joining me again today, and of course, all our viewers. Have a great weekend, and God bless.